Today we're creating a no salt spice blend utilizing 24 herbs and spices. Now this is basically going to be a generic spice blend, but I wanted to focus on things that I know were really going to enhance the flavors naturally occurring in whatever we added this spice blend to. So I'm focusing on umami and flavor enhancing ingredients without using salt. So to do this, first of all, you're going to need a container to put your spice blend in. This is a repurposed coffee container. I really like these because it's glass and it has a sealable lid. Next, you're probably going to want one of these. Now this is a canning funnel. It is not necessary to do this, but it's going to make your life so much easier to get all these ingredients into said vessel. If you don't have a canning funnel, you can simply take a very clean piece of paper and create your own funnel, so that way you're good to go. You might be asking me, why can't I just use a normal funnel? Well, I have found in using a traditional funnel, the aperture is small enough that some of these herbs are gonna start to clog that up, and it's really annoying. So using a canning funnel that has that larger aperture is really gonna help you out. Final tool, other than measuring devices, that you might want is a spice grinder. Now, our spice grinder is actually a little mini coffee grinder that we have repurposed to grind spices. There are commercial spice grinders out there. I'll make sure to put one in the description below so that way you can find it. If you don't have access to a spice grinder, then it's going to be important for you to get pre-ground spices before adding them to this mixture. We want the spice blend to be able to coat whatever you're adding it to, and if you have whole ingredients in there, they're really not going to give their flavor up so readily. Also, I have found in general that whole ingredients that are freshly ground tend to be more rich in flavor than pre-ground stuff. But as we're making a spice blend, and hopefully you're gonna make a large enough amount that it'll last you for at least a little while, then that really isn't that critical to focus on because they're gonna be ground in here. Okay, so to start our blend, I'm going to be utilizing some of the spices and herbs that you see in many of our recipes. And the reason being is that those ingredients are pretty much something we're going to want in everything we make anyway, so it might as well be in our spice blend. And those things are onion powder, garlic powder, and nutritional yeast. There we go, that's better. So to start off with, I am going to add half a cup of nutritional yeast to my mixture. We get our nutritional yeast from Amazon in bulk, and then we just refill these mason jars with it so that it's easily accessible to us because we use it so often. Another trick is that we actually, instead of using a traditional plastic top, we use a Parmesan shaker top on our mason jar. So that way it's really easy for us to just shake our amount of nutritional yeast out. You can also use this lid on whatever vessel you use for your spice blend so you can have the same accessibility. Multitasking here, and since I've only used this for nutritional yeast, I can just switch it over to my nutritional yeast container. Okay, so there's my half a cup of nutritional yeast. Why is it that everything always seems to take longer when you're trying to film? I don't know. Next is onion powder, and I'm going to put the same amount, half a cup of onion powder. Now, another good trick that I've done before is I have repurposed these larger spice containers. I just wash them out really good, make sure they're 100% dry, peel the label off, and then I can just use this as my container rather than this because they too have the handy dandy shaker top. Also, the onion powder demonstrated quite lovely how those powdered herbs and spices sometimes just kind of poof all over the place. So be careful when you're doing this not to have your face directly over it and inhale while you're pouring in your contents. Or you may get a snootful of something that you really don't want to, particularly if it's mustard. Don't inhale mustard, that's bad for you. So finally, of our main ingredients, we have garlic powder, and so we're going to add a half a cup of garlic powder as well. All right, so the next ingredient on my list is citrus zest. Now, you can do a combination of zests, be orange, lime, and lemon, or you can cheat like I am, and I'm actually using our Rangpur lime zest. Rangpur is a hybrid between mandarin oranges and citron, so it has kind of that orangey, limey combo already. So I'm gonna go ahead and I want to put these in my grinder because I need a much finer powder-like form than just the dried zest. And for this, I'm going to add 1/4 cup, as I don't want the citrus to be too overwhelming. You may think it's strange to have citrus in a spice and herb blend, but that citric note really enhances lots of flavors and really adds to the party. Since I am starting on the materials I need to grind, I'm going to go ahead and select some more of my ingredients that need to be ground so I can grind them together. So the next thing I'm going to add is celery seed. And I actually want a pretty significant amount of this as well. So I am going to start with 2 tablespoons. And now that I have a decent amount of material in my spice grinder, I am going to go ahead and make sure my lid is on well, and I'm going to grind these spices up. You will find that lots of times, depending on the size of the material you're trying to grind, pulsing is definitely the way to go. And if you get things stuck underneath the blade, if you hold it carefully, you can invert it, shake it around, and get those particles loosen up so you can grind them better. I also like to tap the cap, as it were, because once you get it to that fine powder, it tends to stick everywhere. And then be careful when you remove the cap so that that powder doesn't escape and make a big mess. Oh, the aroma is fantastic. It's really crazy. Just the celery seed and the citrus blended together is really wonderful. All right, so now that I have that done, I'm going to go ahead and add this. But before I do that, I want to give you a quick look at how fine this got. That's what the citrus zest looked like before grinding. That's what the celery seed looked like before grinding. And here they are together, nicely ground up in this really fine powder. Perfect. Okay, now that I have those ground to my liking, I'm going to go ahead and add them to the mixture. Because I know I'm going to have to grind more ingredients, I don't really need to focus too much on getting this perfectly clean. It's starting to look like a spice mixture already. All right, what is next? Next is dillweed. Now for this, I'm not going to grind it. I'm just going to let it be its little flaky leaves because they're so tiny that I'm not really concerned about that. So I am going to add a tablespoon of dillweed to this mixture. Next is mustard seed. I'm using whole yellow mustard. You could go ahead and use ground mustard if you prefer. And for this, I am going to add 2 tablespoons to my spice grinder. Next is black pepper. I'm using whole black peppercorns, so those are going to go in the spice grinder as well. And I'm going to use 2 tablespoons of that as well. Another slightly unusual ingredient is rose hips. It's important that you use rose hips and not rose or rose petals, as the rose hips have more of a herbaceous citrus flavor profile rather than just the floral elements of the rose itself. And for that, I am going to add 1 tablespoon into my spice blender. Let me give you another close-up look of what that new mixture in my spice blender looks like. All right, there you go. It's time to put our lid back on and give this a few pulses. All right, that took a little bit longer to grind up because the texture of not only the black peppercorns, but some aspects of the rose hips are really tough. And so you may have to grind it a bit and then give your grinder a break because you don't want to overheat it. But as I open it up, I can see that it's a really fine powder. Let me show you that as well. All right, now that I am satisfied with how fine it is, I'm gonna go ahead and add that to my mix as well. Okay, we're getting down to the nitty-gritty now. It's time for turmeric, and you can see by the coloration of our spice grinder, we actually grow, dry, and grind our own turmeric, and we just reuse our original store-bought turmeric container to keep adding to that. If you have the means, I highly suggest you try this for yourself. We find that our homegrown turmeric is so much more flavorful and really is like nearly practically a different spice than the comparatively rather bland store-bought turmeric. It really was quite impressive, the difference. So for this, I am going to add 1 tablespoon, but if you are using a store-bought, you may want to add slightly more. And check out that color. It's just so vibrant when you grow it yourself. That aroma is just, that's something else. I wish I had smell-o-vision for you. Next comes mushroom powder, and this is a fine grain. It's not as fine as a powder though, so I think I'm gonna go ahead and add this to my spice grinder just so that way it can incorporate more thoroughly through the mixture. I do know from experience that these dissolve rather quickly, and so even in this larger consistency, I think that they would transfer their flavor to whatever you added to it. But just to keep it mostly a powder style consistency throughout, I'm gonna add it to my grinder. And for this, I'm gonna add 2 tablespoons. Next is coriander. I happen to have some ground coriander. I honestly don't know why we have ground coriander because we have so many coriander seeds, but that will save you a step and you won't have to grind it because it's already ground. For this, I am going to use 2 teaspoons. Another interesting ingredient is a fenugreek seed. You may or may not have this. If you can't find it at your local grocer, you could probably find it at a grocery store that offers food or supplies for Indian food, or you could probably get it online. I will look and see if I can find a link and I'll put it in the description for you. This is going to be added to our grinder and I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of that. Next we have cumin. Cumin is a great spice, but I can find it can become quickly overwhelming. So for our blend, we are going to be adding 1 teaspoon of ground cumin. Next, I have ground ginger. I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of ground ginger. Oh, I absolutely love ground ginger. I love ginger in any form, let's be honest. Next, we have some crushed red pepper flake. As I want this to be a powder, it's gonna go in the grinder first. And this is really optional, up to you. If you absolutely don't like any spice in your food, then you can simply omit this. If you pretty much like everything to have a baseline of spice, you can adjust this up if you like. But for us, we're just going to do 1 teaspoon of the red pepper flake. Next is ground cloves. Again, if you have whole cloves, you can add them to your grinder. But for these, I think I'm going to need a smaller measuring device because clove is so potent. It's really going to add to this, but I don't want it to take over. So let me get a smaller measuring device. So for our clove, we're going to add a 1/2 teaspoon of ground clove. Cinnamon. Oh, I really like cinnamon too. I think for this particular mixture, I'm going to put a full teaspoon of cinnamon. This is ground cinnamon, of course. If you don't have ground cinnamon, then you are going to have to grind your own. I don't know if my little spice grinder could take on a full stick of cinnamon. I've never tried. Another spice that I really enjoy, and I have got a greater appreciation of it lately is paprika. So I'm going to put a full tablespoon of paprika into our mix. All right, so we have these herbs left. Let's just go ahead, and I think they're all going to fit in here with the ingredients we already have in our grinder. So let me rearrange some space here. Thyme. You can never have enough thyme, or at least that's what my husband says. I was never really all that excited about thyme, but my husband has changed my mind on that. It's got a really lovely lemon kind of thing going on, and that's delightful for practically any dish. So I am putting roughly a tablespoon of thyme. This is, as you can tell by our fancy packaging, some thyme that I grew and we dried it ourselves. Then we have some marjoram. I think I'm going to do 2 teaspoons of marjoram. Now, by the way I'm doing this, you're probably thinking I'm just kind of guessing, and that's kind of true, but kind of not. This list of ingredients is what I've always put in our basic spice blend. I just never really tend to measure them. So I want to have exact amounts for you, and I knew which ones I had most of. And so if you notice, I keep smelling them, and that helps me remember, oh, I'm gonna need more of that, or I'm gonna need less of that. Rosemary. This is another homegrown situation here. I think this lid keeps popping off. That's why we have it taped on oddly. So rosemary are these needle-like herbs, and because again we want it all to be finely ground, I'm going to go ahead and add this to the spice grinder. I don't know if I'm going to get everybody in there. We're starting to get filled up. And I'm going to do 2 teaspoons of rosemary. Oregano. So we have our homegrown oregano and our store-bought oregano. Doesn't really matter, but the final is going to be a full tablespoon, whatever that takes of either to make that happen. My homegrown leaves are slightly larger than my store-bought, so I'm gonna have to be tricksy here and not dump this everywhere. When you have larger leaves, it's more difficult to make sure that you're measuring and getting enough in there because they take up more space and they create more air pockets that obviously don't have flavor in them. So I'm just combining these two. I have a lid that's missing. And basil. Again, this is my homegrown basil. These leaves are huge, so I want to use 1 tablespoon of basil as well. And because these are big, I'm just going to dump all this in here. All right, so now we're going to grind these up, hopefully. And now that we have that in a beautiful fine powder consistency, I'm going to add that to our pot. Now we are done with all of our ingredients. So I want to make sure that I clean this out and get everything in there at this point because I don't need to grind anymore. And I found my patented technique of just bashing a spoon in there. The vibration of tapping with a spoon knocks out all those loose things because trying to scrape them out really doesn't work very well. If you want to get every last bit out, you may find using a stiff bristled brush will work best to get all of those out and into your container. All right, so now you see all the different layers that we have in here when we were adding the ingredients. So the last step is simply to tightly affix your lid and then shake it up. Ta-da! I'm going to make sure that I label this so that way I know what is in this jar of mystery and make sure that it's handy for me when cooking. You can also create your own spice blends based on a theme, be it a region of the world or a particular style of cooking. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time on the Plant-Based Bistro. Bye-bye.
Chioma quell'aria brillante, non chiudrai farfalloni amoroso, notte e giorno